All right. All right, guys. It's really late while I'm recording this. I'm very tired and I kind of have to keep it down so as not to wake anybody else up. If that's going to be a problem for you, I'm sorry. But I saw Blake's video where he recorded by himself on the Shonen Jump app, and I felt obligated to try and produce some content myself. So, the new trailer released for Saint Seiya, Netflix's adaptation, and I've had some thoughts percolating in my mind for the last week now after it's released, and I've kind of been watching some of the reactions people have had. Overall, it's been rather negative. The video has a lot of dislikes on it, and from a fan perspective, that's pretty unsurprising. However, I think anybody who's new to Saint Seiya that was looking forward to the Netflix adaptation might be a little bit confused. So part of me thought about producing this video explaining exactly why Netflix's adaptation so far seems, I guess the best word to describe it would be, let's say, doomed from the outset, is because there are some rather apparent changes from the source material, and those changes could be detrimental to the story moving forward, especially considering that, from what we understand, this is actually going to try and cover all the same narrative beats of the manga and anime. From this trailer, we know that the first season is going to be the Black Knights arc, also known as the Phoenix Icky arc, and there's no reason to assume that they aren't going to do the other sagas that follow from it. However, with what we've seen in the trailer thus far, it seems to have already deviated rather significantly. Just for the record, so that we know where my perspective stands, I've only read the manga of Saint Seiya. I haven't watched the original anime. However, from what I know, it is supposed to be rather accurate to the manga, save for a few aesthetic changes. Like, I know they don't change the designs of the armors as much, and that the armors are a little more simplified for animation's sake. However, from a narrative point of view, the manga and anime, or the manga and anime are rather close. Now, first, I'm going to mention the two changes that a couple of people have problems with, but I actually don't. The first being this scene where we see them fighting some helicopters. As far as I'm aware, there hasn't been a scene depicting that in the original anime, and there certainly wasn't one in the manga. However, I understand that Netflix is also trying to retell the story in their own way, and I don't have a problem with it because there's no reason to believe that the Saints couldn't handle fighting a helicopter, and I'm kind of interested to see under what circumstances that incident happens. Now, the other thing is that they're changing a lot of the names. I don't know all of the name changes. I've heard that Shiryu's name is going to get changed. Shun's name is going to get changed to, I think, Shun or Sean, something like that. We'll talk more about Shun later. Sayori's name is being changed to Saina, like the Deke dub, which a lot of people, I think, aren't happy with because they didn't like the Deke dub, and I can fully admit from what I've seen the Deke dub isn't terribly good. However, for, I guess, trying to bridge old fans or new fans, I could see why they would do that. Okay, so now I'm going to get into some major spoilers. If you do not want Saint Seiya's plot spoiled for you, then I guess don't continue. But if you're trying to understand exactly why fans don't like the changes, or maybe even why you're feeling as a fan that these changes are some kind of betrayal to the original source material, then I recommend you continue. So I remember that there's a lot of twists in Saint Seiya, but there's two really, really good ones. And so far it looks like both of these twists are kind of ruined or diminished because of the changes we've seen in the new trailer. The first of these changes pertains directly to the Black Knights themselves. Now, in the manga, all of the Black Knights pretty much just look like dark, evil clones of the main four saints, and they kind of have evil versions of the armor that the saints have. They're kind of artificial black versions of the bronze cloths. And so they have to fight them for plot reasons, and they end up killing most of the Black Knights. Now, later on in the arc, it is revealed that all of the main 5 characters are actually half brothers with each other, because the head of the Grodd Foundation, who runs the orphanage they all come from, was told by a gold saint that gave him the reincarnation of Athena that he needs to find enough children to don the bronze cloths so that they could protect her. And his solution to doing that was to seed like thousands of kids and put them in situations where they would become orphans, and then force them to take the trials of the cloths, and most of them end up either failing or dying in the process of trying to become bronze saints. And the Black Knights are those who trained to become bronze knights and failed to do so. So this sudden revelation seems to imply, though it's not outright stated, that they might have just killed some of their half-brothers. So what initially seemed like a series of goofy kind of mirror matches, and don't get me wrong, that's still kind of what they are, but I guess a little bit more weight is added to those fights after this revelation, because it's pretty simple, really. It seems like they killed their brothers, but they don't know that for sure, and we never get any confirmation about it. However, in the Netflix version, it looks like they're changing the Black Knights to be more kind of faceless enemies with kind of this generic knight in armor look with these helmets that cover their faces. So that if the helmets never come off, that's going to diminish some of the brutality from the story, and also some of the fun factor, because they're not going to be fighting literal mirror matches. Now, the dark versions of their own armors could still show up, but we haven't really seen any signs of that from the trailers, so I think a lot of people are a little worried because of that. Now, to the trailer's credit, there is a plot point hinted at that is kind of interesting, which is it looks like Cassios is going to become a Dark Knight during the Black Knight saga. Which, if this is the case, that would be good, because Cassios was a criminally underdeveloped character in the manga. He was a Chapter 1 punching bag, essentially, for Seiya. Seiya beats him, and he gets to get the Pegasus armor. And then we don't see Cassios again until his heroic death scene in the Golden Sanctuary arc. So if we have this... And, there's all these emotions that come up about how he was jealous of Seiya and how he wants to prove that he's worthy of being a knight despite failing to obtain the Pegasus cloth. And if we actually see a narrative arc of him kind of metaphorically going into the dark side and becoming a dark knight, I think that would really do something good for his character. So now we need to get into the most controversial change. Shun is being changed from a boy into a girl. And this has been confirmed by the director of the new Netflix version. It seems that they're trying to make some kind of statement, and it's a pretty obvious one. Girls can be strong fighters too, and this is about representation. The original Saint Seiya was kind of an all-boys club, and that was by design because it was a Shonen Jump manga from almost 30 years ago now, I believe. I just looked it up. It's definitely been 30 years since the first chapter of Saint Seiya released. Honestly, it's hard for me to fault them with today's current political climate, and I suppose the potential for a female audience being there. However, I also think they probably should have known better than to just gender swap a character and not expect a negative fan reaction. And in a lot of ways, Shun is the worst choice to switch the gender of. Shun was honestly something of a really progressive character for the time. So each of the Bronze Saints has one core facet to their character that kind of informs their narrative arc. Seiya's is that he's essentially a little bit weaker than the other four Bronze Saints, and thus he has to struggle a little more during his fights. However, that makes it all the more heroic when he manages to salvage the strength to keep on getting up and win the fight in the end. Shuryu is incredibly reckless and often ends up damaging his body, most often in the form of blindness. So his narrative arc is about sacrifice and obtaining tranquility. Hyoga is a person that is haunted by their past and past events, and most of his fights, most of his meaningful fights, I should say, involve him fighting with a phantom of his past, be that his mentor, Kraken, or something else. And then Phoenix Icky's personal arc is all about protection and trying to be there for his brothers, despite the fact that in every single, well, not every single, but most of his fights end with him dying or being trapped in some way, but due to the nature of the Phoenix Cloth, he will be back. Now, you could have changed any of these characters into a girl, and while I'd still say that's not a very good move, it would be less of an issue from a narrative perspective because those narrative arcs have nothing to do with those particular characters' genders or their expectations. However, Shun's personal narrative arc does, in fact, involve his gender. Because Shun's narrative arc is that he's incredibly peaceful, he's incredibly sensitive, and he tries to diplomatize with every single one of his enemies to the very bitter end, and only kills them if he has to, and then has a real sense of guilt about it every single time. Shun's feminine nature is emphasized by the fact that he's the only one with a female constellation that his cloth is attuned to, and well, I guess there's the fact it's pink as well, for what that's worth, and there's the obvious pun that Andromeda sounds kind of like androgynous. So when you take a character where the entire point is that they don't fit into the expected gender norms, and then switch them into the gender that those norms were expected for, it kind of robs the character of impact. and robs something from the original intent of the character. Now, to the trailer's credit, it does seem that Shun's personality has also changed too a little bit, so perhaps now she'll be a girl who doesn't fit the expected gender norms of, sex, I guess. Doesn't fit the expectations of behavior based on her sex. However, then I have to wonder how exactly this would affect the Hades arc, which I'll get into momentarily. Beyond just being an issue for that particular character, this is also an issue for the setting itself because, well, it's a major plot point that every single female saint has to wear this mask. And the reason for this is kind of twofold. There's the in universe explanation, which is that though female saints are a natural phenomenon, the actual saint organization themselves is actually rather sexist, and they believe that it is shameful for a woman to have to fight, so they make them wear these masks so as to hide their, I guess, feminine appearance. And there's also a rule about how they have to kill anybody that sees them with their mask off or fall in love with them, which I don't really want to get into I don't really want to get into my thoughts on that, so I'm just going to leave it. I'm going to leave that on the table for another video. But there's also the plot reason, which is that Seiya's main goal throughout the story is to find his sister. Which, now that I think about it, Shun would technically be his sister in the new version. Or so I should say, to find his full sister, Seika. So, due to the mask dilemma, Seiya, for large portions of the manga, suspects his tutor, the Silver Saint Eagle Marion, is actually his older sister. Now, we do see in the Netflix trailer that Marion is still in this version of the story, and she still has the mask on. So I wonder if they're gonna make it either something that she only does, or if they're going to ignore the whole mask rule entirely. I suppose if they really want to be progressive, they could make Shun transgender and have it so she's a girl or she sees herself as actually a man and therefore is exempt from the mask rule. But I really have trouble believing that the sanctuary would comply with that. So I don't know. It just seems like it really just doesn't seem like it'll make sense. Furthermore, this is going to have a major impact on the Hades chapter. So this is where that other really good twist comes into play. During the Hades chapter, things get really rough for the Bronze Saints as they're traveling through hell. And the other Bronze Saints start discussing the possibility of leaving Shun behind, saying things like, oh, he's too sensitive, he probably can't handle this, he's too merciful to his enemies. This comes up it comes up throughout the entire series. They have discussions like this about Shun, but this point gets really hammered home in the Hades arc. And the Hades chapter itself is about the nature of forgiveness and sins, because Hades is kind of depicted as this tyrannical figure who can't forgive anybody for anything, which would make him the opposite of Shun. And there's even a part where they go over every single one of Seiya's sins, down to things like you once trampled over a bunch of ants as a child, right? It gets absurd. It's like you squashed some bugs as a toddler, and now you're this unforgivable monster. Of course, when Shun's own sins are evaluated, it turns out Shun is without sin. Shun has never done anything bad with bad intent, and he's always felt bad whenever he's done something bad. So the major twist kicks in when they get to the final level of hell, or the final layer of hell, I should say. It turns out that Hades has his soul trapped in this urn, and that he's actually been waiting for the physical reincarnation of his body to arrive back to him separated from his soul, so that way his actual soul can take over his reincarnated body and become ruler of the universe again. It's okay if you're confused. I don't really understand the mechanics behind reincarnation in the Saint Seiya setting either. So it turns out that Shun actually is the vessel for Hades, and through that we get to see a version of Shun if he were more masculine and cruel, and we get to see what Shun would be like if he actually was what Seiya and the other Bronze Knights were wanting him to be like. And through that fight, the other Bronze Knights gain a greater appreciation for Shun's gentleness and empathy. Now, I guess it's not impossible for Netflix to still do a twist like that in the Hades arc and make it just as impactful, but I think it's rather doubtful.